On a cold rainy night, the small town of Brooksville was unusually quiet. The streets, usually filled with people rushing home after work, were now empty. Water pooled on the sidewalks, and the wind howled as though the town itself was mourning something unseen. In the middle of Main Street stood a modest family restaurant called Tony's Kitchen. Its warm lights glowed through the fogged-up windows, and the smell of freshly baked bread and grilled chicken drifted out into the night. Inside, the restaurant owner, Tony, wiped down the counter with a rag, humming softly. Business had been slow that week. He had already sent most of his staff home early, keeping just one waitress and a dishwasher to help him close up. Tony was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by both hardship and years of smiling at customers. He had inherited the restaurant from his father and carried on the family tradition with pride. To him, the restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a place of community, of laughter, and of love. But lately, the bills had been piling up. The town's economy wasn't what it used to be, and fewer customers meant tighter nights. Even so, Tony never let his worries show to his staff or customers. He believed that kindness, like good food, had a way of coming back. As Tony was about to lock the front door, he heard a soft knock. At first, he thought the storm was playing tricks on his ears. But then, he heard it again, gentle, hesitant, almost apologetic. He walked over and peered through the glass. There, standing in the rain, was an elderly woman holding a small child by the hand. Both were drenched, shivering, and looked utterly exhausted. The boy clutched a torn backpack, and the woman's thin coat clung to her like wet paper. Tony hesitated for a moment, his mind flashing to the empty till in the cash register. He didn't have much to spare, and his accountant had just warned him that one more month like this and he could fall behind on rent. But his heart wouldn't let him turn them away. He opened the door and said gently, "Come in, you'll catch your death out there." The old woman looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude but also embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We didn't mean to bother you. We just needed somewhere warm, just for a while." The little boy, around 7 or 8 years old, squeezed her hand tightly and looked up at Tony with wide, pleading eyes. Without a word, Tony stepped aside and motioned them in. The warmth of the restaurant embraced them immediately, and the boy let out a small sigh of relief. Tony led them to a booth near the back, away from the draft of the door. "Sit here," he said softly. "I'll get you some towels and something warm to drink." He returned with 2 fluffy towels from the kitchen and 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. The boy's eyes widened as he took his first sip, and the old woman wrapped her hands around her mug as though it were life itself. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know how much this means." Tony smiled. "No thanks needed. You're safe here tonight." He brought them a plate of fresh bread and soup, the kind he reserved for regulars who loved his homemade recipes. As they ate slowly, savoring every bite, Tony asked, "Do you have somewhere to go? Family? Friends?" The woman shook her head. "My name is Martha," she said. "This is my grandson, Daniel. We've had a hard time lately. His parents, my daughter and her husband, were in a car accident last year. They didn't make it. Daniel came to live with me, but I lost my job soon after. Then the landlord raised the rent, and I couldn't keep up. We've been trying to get by, but tonight, we had nowhere else to go." Her voice broke, and she dabbed her eyes with the edge of the towel. Daniel lowered his head, staring at his soup. Tony felt his chest tighten. He had seen hardship before. His own father had struggled to keep this very restaurant afloat during tough times. But hearing Martha's story hit him differently. He glanced at Daniel, whose eyes carried the kind of sadness no child should bear. Tony took a deep breath. "Listen," he said. "I don't have much, but you can stay here tonight. We've got a small storage room in the back. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. You'll have a roof over your heads." Martha's eyes welled with tears. "I can't let you do that. We can't impose." Tony shook his head firmly. "It's not an imposition. It's what people are supposed to do for each other." That night, after the restaurant closed, Tony set up a cot and some blankets in the storage room. Daniel curled up beside his grandmother, and within minutes, both were asleep. Tony checked on them quietly before locking up and heading upstairs to his small apartment above the restaurant. As he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about them. He had only meant to help them for one night. But as he drifted off, he had no idea how much this single act of kindness would change everything in his life. The next morning, Tony came downstairs early and started preparing breakfast. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh orange juice. When Martha and Daniel emerged, they looked both refreshed and shy. Daniel's face lit up at the sight of the food. "Is all this for us?" he asked in awe. Tony grinned. "Of course. Eat as much as you like." Martha tried to protest, but Tony waved her off. "Don't worry about it." As they ate, Tony noticed something. Daniel was polite, well-spoken, and even though he was clearly hungry, he always waited for his grandmother to take the first bite before he dug in. That small gesture told Tony volumes about the boy's heart. Over the next few days, Martha and Daniel stayed on. Tony told them it was fine until they figured out their next steps. He gave Martha small jobs around the restaurant, folding napkins, wiping tables, and helping with prep work in the kitchen. Daniel became fast friends with the staff, who adored him for his curiosity and sweet manners. Slowly, the restaurant began to feel different. Customers who noticed Martha helping out and Daniel reading his schoolbooks in a corner booth started asking about them. When they heard their story, word spread through town. Some customers even left larger tips, asking Tony to use it for the little boy and his grandma. One evening, a businessman who had stopped in for dinner overheard Daniel telling Tony about how much he missed school. The boy had been out for months because Martha couldn't afford supplies or transport. The businessman, moved by their situation, pulled Tony aside. "I run a scholarship program," he said. "If the boy is as bright as he seems, we can sponsor his education. Full tuition, books, everything." Tony was stunned. When he shared the news with Martha, she broke down crying. Daniel's eyes shone brighter than ever. For the first time in a long while, he saw a future. As weeks passed, Martha also found new stability. One of Tony's regular customers owned a small flower shop and, after seeing her dedication in the restaurant, offered her a part-time job. "Someone with your heart and work ethic would be a blessing in my store," the shopkeeper said. Martha accepted gratefully, promising to give it her all. Suddenly, the woman who had walked into Tony's restaurant broken and hopeless now had hope blooming around her like spring flowers. But what truly changed Tony's life wasn't just watching Martha and Daniel rebuild theirs, it was how their presence transformed his own. The restaurant, once struggling, now had a new energy. People came not just for the food, but for the story of kindness they saw unfolding within its walls. Local newspapers caught wind of it and ran a feature on the restaurant that gave shelter. Soon, customers from nearby towns came to dine at Tony's kitchen, wanting to be part of the story. Sales skyrocketed. Where Tony had once worried about bills, he now found himself expanding the menu, hiring more staff, and even upgrading the restaurant's worn furniture. He realized something profound. In helping others, he had helped himself far more than he ever imagined. But the story didn't end there. One night, several months later, a sleek car pulled up outside the restaurant. A man in a sharp suit walked in, looking around curiously. He approached Tony and introduced himself as David Reynolds, a wealthy philanthropist from the city. "I heard about what you did for that woman and her grandson," David said. "It moved me deeply. I've been looking for people with genuine hearts, people who do good not for recognition but because it's right. I want to partner with you. Imagine expanding your restaurant into a foundation, feeding the homeless, supporting struggling families, giving back on a larger scale." Tony was taken aback. He had never dreamed of anything beyond his small town. But as he looked at Martha, smiling as she served tables, and Daniel, now thriving in school, he realized that this was bigger than just one restaurant. This was destiny. Over the following year, Tony's Kitchen became more than a business, it became a beacon of hope. With David's support, they opened soup kitchens in nearby towns. They organized food drives and provided job training programs. Martha became a coordinator for the foundation, using her story to inspire others. Daniel, encouraged by his new opportunities, dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day, determined to fight for those without a voice. And Tony, he finally understood his father's old saying, "The measure of a man is not in how much he keeps, but in how much he gives." His single act of kindness had set in motion a ripple effect that changed countless lives. Years later, when Tony looked back at that rainy night when a knock on his door changed everything, he often wondered what would have happened if he had turned them away. But deep down, he knew the answer. His life would have remained small, bound by worries and bills. Instead, by opening his door and his heart, he had opened a future filled with purpose, joy, and community. Martha and Daniel became family to him, and together, they built something far greater than a restaurant. They built a legacy of kindness. And so, the story of Tony's Kitchen lived on, not as a tale of business success, but as a reminder that the smallest act of compassion can create waves that reach farther than we ever imagined.